Peter, I guess you're on mute.
Yeah, you introduce yourself first, Mikhail.
Okay. So my name is Mikhail Pavlov. I work at Striven Consulting as a QA consultant, and I have more than 20 years of experience in IT, mostly on test leadership roles. So in the last 4 years, I work in Striven Consulting and accomplished 3 large projects. And so now we are going to present together with Peter. Peter.
Yeah, so hi everyone. Delighted to be here. I've been working in QA for the last 16 years. In particular, I've found a lot of work in QA strategy, setting up, maintaining QA competencies in different companies, including some very large names in telecoms and other sectors. And in particular, been brought into some very large projects and some very troubled projects to kind of turn them around. I think some of that experience is what we'll cover here today. I think we're hoping to have kind of a conversation about some of the things that have gone wrong in our experiences. And while I hope to allude to maybe some of the names that you would recognize, we're not going to share any client names in particular, but we'll tell you which industry they were in and kind of give you some background as to what we think maybe we would learn from our experiences. So I'm hoping we can have a conversation about software testing and just share some experiences, share some things we saw go wrong or problems that we fell into, some pitfalls, and have a conversation that leads us forwards as a community to say, like, there are some things we've done wrong and mea culpa, and how do we learn from that? So we're going to kind of kick off then today by, maybe talking about how testing has evolved, talk about how software itself has evolved, and then let's kind of talk about the objective of our session tonight, which is, maybe to talk about some of the traps we feel like we fell into in our careers, and not just ourselves, but also like the industry of testing. Like, where did the industry go wrong? Like, we know there were some moments when we were advocating for things that in hindsight may not have been fully thought through. They were almost, well-intentioned ideas taken to a logical conclusion that wasn't fully supported. And so it's useful always to think back and say, hey, look, what was going wrong? And in particular, I think we're inspired by not only retrospectives and lessons learned, but also by other thinking. So like, I particularly love this list here. And I love this idea that, in the Agile community, they're not looking for one particular thing that they see going wrong, but they're looking for, smells, things that when they see it, it indicates that something is wrong. And so what we kind of have a conversation about internally in our company is like, okay, so how do we know when there's something wrong that we should investigate further? Like, what are some anti-patterns in testing that we need to be mindful of? And then the next question is like, okay, so how do we get into those anti-patterns, and how do we avoid making the same mistake in the future? So these are some, like, I don't know, you could call them philosophical questions, right? But they're actually more like a lessons learned exercise that we do constantly to say, okay, like, if we look back 5 years, if we look back 10 years, what were the things that we saw people in the industry advocating for that on hindsight didn't really make all that much sense? And how do we get there? Like, what were the issues that were underlying the assumptions that were, in that received wisdom that were problematic? So we're going to discuss some of these, like particularly 3, and we hope to have a conversation with everyone, and maybe at the end share some other pitfalls, like traps, that we feel like may have happened in your experience, right? So
yeah, that's really important to hear your voice as well, and discuss traps you observed during your career. And so here we are talking about, first of all, our experience, but of course we refer to overall industry experience. And I guess, Peter, we can go to the next slide and talk a little bit about the history. So this diagram doesn't pretend to be complete or accurate, and I am afraid that you cannot even see all these words here, but I can definitely walk through this diagram quickly. So we selected few events which we consider as noticeable milestones in the industry history, or influencing or impacting testing in one or another manner. And what we can see here, what would I do? So I would split testing history in three main phases. The first phase is a rudimentary testing. Of course, all these three phases overlap each other. The first phase is rudimentary testing, which we had at the beginning of this journey, when computers were big, when only military and big companies applications were in place, and everything was so out of ordinary people mind and everyday practice. At the same time, there were no special testing teams, there were no special testing activities, dedicated testing activities sometimes, but there were investigations, there were books, there were articles which triggered a lot of thinking in among in IT industry, and led to the second phase, which I would say massive heavy quality assurance processes, when testing became a part of most of the projects, and waterfall impacted that massive quality assurance processes appearance. So over time, test automation began evolving, and this testing method significantly impacted further steps, along with other demands, industry demands. First of all, it's demand to get everything ready in the fast manner. So that's why we have now Agile, that's why we have DevOps. And testing evolved as well in accordance with these trends. Of course, this space, this road wasn't paved accurately. There were many obstacles, many bumps over this road, but at the same time, we are here now, and we have a certain level of testing which is still evolving, together with methodologies, together with digital revolution, together with technology innovation, and all these flows go in parallel. Of course, testing sometimes is behind, but nevertheless, it's being evolved. It's in progress.
Yeah, I mean, I think that it's really valuable to put this on a page. We actually started coming up with this idea. We kind of just put all the QA methods that we could think of on a page, and then we realized that wasn't the complete story, that those QA methods only made sense when you put them in context of the testing of the technologies that were being tested. And then quickly you saw the evolution of the technology under test, and then you actually saw, like, we then thought, well, that's not the full story either, right? Like, clearly the business objective that we're trying to test for has also changed massively over the same period. So, you know, some of the things that are important to take into consideration: testing has changed, it continues to change, it continues to evolve. If anything, there's more schools of testing and more valid thinking in testing than there ever has been. It's less of a single right way to test and more of multiple right ways to test, all of which must be selected from depending on the area of software that's being tested. And actually, the challenge for testing professionals now is more than ever to evaluate the technology under test. Like, actually, AI and some of the evolving software is demanding that we come up with more innovative ways to test. So this evolution isn't going to end anytime soon, right? And actually, it's continued all the way through the history of software development. It will continue on, and that subjective relationship, or that dynamic relationship between how we test and the things we're testing and the objectives that we're testing for, is just going to continue. So there's almost going to be a proliferation, possibly, in the ways that are valid to test with.
Yeah.
So that's just something that we kind of started with. We're like, hey, we've come a really long way. So then let's kind of talk about traps then. When we talk about traps, we're looking back over this wide and diverse history, and we're looking for points when we feel like, we were well-intentioned, but things just got a bit wonky. There were tangents that were explored that could have otherwise been not explored, right? We would have been better off not going down it, right? Where there was some excessive use of ideas that weren't well-founded. And this Martin Fowler quote, an attractive road line with flowers that's actually a maze filled with monsters, right? Where were there some examples of this? You I'm sure are all now thinking of like the examples in your head. And we picked 3 at random that really resonated with us, and we're going to talk about them. And at the end of this, we'd love it if you would, share with us some of your ideas of like, okay, what are anti-patterns we fell into? We should explore these anti-patterns, work out how we avoid a similar issue in the future. So the first one is like excessive process orientation, like building factories for testing, right, that go beyond simply building a competency in organizations. I want to talk about this a little bit, and then Mikhail, please jump in.
Yeah, absolutely.
What we observed is that at a particular point in time, maybe we dumbed down testing. We created a commoditization of testing, and I think we're still kind of maybe all feeling the impact of working back from that there was a perception that testing, at one point in time, that testing could be, overly simplified, that this was an entry into software, and that it was inevitable that people would move then out of testing into, quote unquote, more valuable roles. And that's part of a sort of oversimplification of what it means to test, like as if the first step out of a computer science degree is to test other people's work, when in reality it's like an entire separate career path often, and requires a different mindset that some developers may not have, and that actually great testers have and may not be great developers, right? Like it's not a switch from one to the other. But coming along with that, there were a whole load of different things that kind of were explored, like endless kind of process optimization, and sort of these big testing centers of excellence that were quite unwieldy actually within organizations. Mikhail?
Yeah, so actually I participated in such shows as a trainer and a coach. And there was one more big issue, and it's still an issue. Few universities have software testing courses as a part of their curriculum. And of course, this gap should have been addressed in one or another manner. And it's definitely about big companies, training centers, and what we can see on this slide. And it's not only about that, it's about testing schools, which appeared, so there were multiple schools appeared in the last 15 years. And some of these schools attracting people, diminished complexity of testing job, and promised high earnings from the very first day of their career. And like every engineering job, testing requires creativity, analytical skills, and not everyone has both. And like every team job, focused on communication, especially bad news, testing requires exceptional soft skills, and not everyone has it. And that's why so probably these schools are not so efficient. And definitely there are many people who changed their career in the last 15 years and became really good testers. And at the same time, I believe there is many more people who were not so successful.
I think in order to balance this out, we also want to point out, what were the valid reasons why we got here? I think some of the things that drove testing into this place were valid reasons why economies of scale for testing were important at the time. I think, early on, I think in the evolution of testing tools, there certainly was a point at which proprietary tools were, much more efficient than open source tools, and even the proprietary tools were not particularly user-friendly. So there was this development of sort of specialist teams for things like performance test and test automation. That is no longer the case, but effectively that developed an incentive, whether it was only that or other factors, but there was definitely an incentive in organizations to achieve economies of scale. But the byproduct, when that was taken to its logical conclusion, is this sense in which testers are commodities. It's all about economies of scale. And what I witnessed in some organizations was a lack of inventiveness and a lack of creativity that led to actually several really preventable incidents, and also a lack of nimbleness, like this sort of engagement process that wasn't sufficiently well broken down, and the organization having to jump through massive release hurdles that then needed to be dismantled. So to kind of summarize, like when we're talking here, we're talking about like a supremacy of process, right? Like really thinking in terms of commoditizing testing and thinking of testing as a cost center. Like, of course, testing is not a cost center. Testing is a value add activity. Like if you don't test your product, there is no product. So it's fundamentally what perhaps we got wrong. And one of the things that we got wrong is to try to explain testing like it's a cost. Testing is not a cost. Testing is a value add activity. It's, we're not manufacturing things, and we really need to explain what we do in creative terms. Like, yes, it's engineering. Yes, there are some scientific elements. Yes, we apply statistics, right? Great. But we actually, like, when you think of the great performers in any test team, actually they're the ones really who are creative, who bring a spark to the way that they think about patterns, and who are engaged every day in pattern recognition. Like, that's kind of the basis of testing. You don't get that if you commoditize thinking about tests, right? That's just not the same thing. It is not just a process of monitoring and control, script everything, just cover everything in scripts. This is not actually a very efficient way to achieve the same objectives you were trying to get to, which is like controlling costs, achieving specialization, and sort of economies of scale.
Yeah, so actually, so we can talk about quality as well. And I believe that the audience would agree about quality, about two things. First of all, quality is subjective, and it is determined by someone who is using the product at the time. And quality is relative. It's changed over time. And the hardest part to define, it's very hard to define quality, because nothing about it is constant, and so that there is on one hand it's a very difficult to do that, but on another hand it's an opportunity in software development. By always trying to catch up with the moving goalposts of your customer expectations, you will constantly be delivering better and higher quality software. That's important here, and so this is one of the traps which should be avoided, definitely.
So then, like, so what, right? Like, I think the question is always, so what? So, like, I feel like many people would instinctively understand where this was, or they've seen, or like have been part of these processes where they felt like, the process is a bit kind of unwieldy. Well, so what? Like, how can we learn from that mistake, like over specialization? Part of it's explaining, right, what we're doing a bit differently. I think part of it also is really being careful about the way we measure test teams. And one of the things that we've had to give a lot of thought to and really think about is like, okay, so like, is there a concept of almost vanity metrics? Like, how do we really incentivize test teams to do the right thing, not just achieve productivity targets? And thinking about the way that we measure testing is really important. We need to be better than just measuring the most obvious thing that we can get from our ALM platform, which is number of test scripts over time, right? That's not really a fair measure, unless what you want is to measure the cost and the efficiency, just pure productivity. So we've got to find a way to move beyond conversations about productivity into questions of value added. Yeah. So that was kind of one of the realizations that we kind of had, like, is if the only way you're measuring your test team is by productivity, then you're probably not going to incentivize the right behaviors in your test team. We move on to the next one. So let's talk about automating all the tests. Right.
Our favorite topic.
Our favorite topic. And this is not to say that automation as a goal is not a good thing. It is simply to say that we have observed in some large teams crazy levels of inefficient automation being maintained, where the value of that automation is not really there. Like the automation team is simply maintaining tests, and they are not adding any tests. Those tests are not finding any defects. They are literally just a weight in the team. All they do all day is just churn around to make sure they fix the tests that are broken in that build, right? And so how did this happen? Like, you know, I come into projects and the question is, okay, something's wrong with this project. We have an automation team. Why aren't we at 80% automation? And the automation team is like maybe 20%, and they can't get any further. And they are like brilliant people, excellent engineers, really smart, and they're working really, really hard. But every time the build drops, the whole automation suite breaks. And the PM is like, I want 80% automation. Like, what's going on here, right? Like, why is this wrong? And so this has come about in a number of projects because the PM knows enough information about automation to be dangerous, right? In the sense that they kind of see the targets that are set by teams at Google or Facebook who are very mature automation framework, and they're like, we should go directly there. Do not pass go, do not collect $200. And the focus is on automating in the most visible way, right? Like where the tool doesn't matter, but this target really does. Kind of not appreciating that there are many different tools, there's many different ways to automate, and actually the tool and the system under test fit is kind of like really important, right? You know, we need to acknowledge engineering realities. This is something that I have seen on countless projects, and it is an education process often that resolves this problem, right? Like, I'm coming into projects and kind of saying, hey, what's going on? And then it's a case of explaining to people, hey, like let's start again. Let's kind of look at the value of these tests. You know, measuring coverage can be meaningless if it's not finding defects, right? Like, if you're not actually finding issues, it can be like fairly low value. So this is kind of, if you think of a Scrum smell, this would be like a testing smell, you know, in my view, right? So, you know, how do we get there? Well, you know, I think a lot of folks who work in software have had explained, hey, look, automation is just more efficient than manual testing. That statement doesn't always apply.
Yeah.
Like, there are systems that are really hard to test in an automated manner. There are some tests that are more expensive to automate than just to do manually, right? So when we really need to, I think, educate and explain, like, automation is not always cheaper. It's not, and it doesn't make you productive, right? By default, you need to like be smart about how you're using it. Likewise, I think, you know, the conversation we had earlier about like tools have really changed. A lot of testing tools historically have had wild claims, like wild sales claims. Thinking back like maybe 10 years, like the claims that everything can be automated by a tool through a user interface where there is no code required. Like, I've heard this like pretty much my whole career, that there's no code required to automate these tests. And clearly it's ridiculous on the face of it.
Peter, I'd like to add here. It looks like so we are missing a very important statement here. So there is still a belief that testing should be formalized, and if it can be formalized, it can be fully automated. And the problem here, and with this problem is really, really critical, that testing is not a crisp automation algorithmic process. So actually, it's a fuzzy social activity which cannot be automated as the essence, at least in the foreseen future. The thing is that, so if you just revisit the classic testing principles, that so you cannot test everything, you can revisit pesticide paradox, you can revisit a defect clustering. So it's clear, it becomes clear that the testing process is not formalized, and there is no one single way to test the same application, and every tester will do it in a little, at least a little bit different way. That's why automation is complex. That's why to convert this this fuzzy social activity in automated process is very, very tough.
So again, I want to play the positive card. Like, how do we get here? You know, the well-intentioned bit was to try to reduce costs, and of course, automation is a very important part of reducing costs. Like, and not grasping for it is, you know, you would be crazy, and we'd be crazy not to advise clients to use automation and to apply automation proactively, dynamically, maybe even aggressively try to apply automation to testing problems. But some of the things that we want to emphasize when we're talking with clients is, you know, we want to set realistic expectations. And the way we're going to do that, and the way that we try to do that, is we really want to identify the levers that will make automation successful. Like, what are the levers we can turn to make automation successful in their case, right? Using different tools, selecting specific scripts, modifying the environment and the data to make it more stable for the automation. There are a number of levers, and it's not simply a case of select the right tool, but there are a number of levers you can pull to make automation really effective and to reduce maintenance. Identifying all of them is actually kind of like a critical learning for us. Like, we want to avoid this trap. Like, first of all, let's identify the levers to be really successful. What is it that Google and Microsoft and Netflix and Facebook have done in their most extremely efficient examples that we need to lead from? You know, also we kind of want to say, like, let's keep track of patterns in test automation. Let's not leave that automation team in a silo, in a room with no windows and locked doors, like, and just say, okay, go off, maintain these scripts and have a good time, guys. Right? So, you know, we want to keep track of the patterns of their test automation and have a conversation with them, which is, like Mikhail says, it's kind of creative, it's inventive, and it's really establishing whether those tests they are automating are providing value. You know, we fundamentally need to mix and match the skills of a tester with the skills of a developer. And it's not the case we can just apply very, very skilled developers to the problem of automation without any guidance and expect it to be valuable. You know, automating a set of tests doesn't mean that they're valuable, and it certainly doesn't mean that they'll continue to be valuable in the ad infinitum, right? Like in towards the infinite future. So, I mean, there are other like things that we take away from it, but those are some things that we learn and ways that we're kind of thinking about these problems. So let's move on. Firing the testers. So we feel like we've heard this one a few times, and I'm sure it's been discussed in this forum multiple times, right? But of course, everyone's been part of an organization where the perception is that testing as a specific career path is no longer required, that cross-functional teams is the way to do things. And that in itself is not a problem, but there are some pitfalls from applying this in a misguided manner. So let's talk about what happens if you take that, not to its logical extreme, but to an extreme and apply it in a way that's not productive. I certainly have been part of trying to rescue massive programs where Agile has been applied by experienced release train engineers, Scrum Masters, and product owners, product managers, who all come from a development background, a development or a business systems analyst background. And the resulting chaos has been just crazy. You know, like teams that have been like a year trying to get a release to the market and just cannot get out of integration test, right? And they have a massive team of leadership, very, very smart people, very, very smart people in the scrums, hundreds of people engaged in the program. And, you know, they're missing some critical things, right? Because they've fired the testers, but they haven't fired all the testers. They've got testers, they're just, something's not working, right? Mikhail.
Yeah, so actually, I want to quote James Bach. So he said recently, he wrote recently in one of his articles, so Agile wasn't created by testers, nor by people who had worked with good testers. And testing craftsmanship, which has been undervalued before, is now under active attack by people who want to be cool, modern, and evolved. So actually, I'm convinced that the most complex and creative part of testing is test design, and it requires senior people who know how to do it. And it is so actually it requires digging deep, focus on the product complexity and relevant heuristics and techniques. That's why creative minds are really needed in testing. So such a mind should possess a personal active toolbox which clears every simple evident tasks immediately, and which allows to its owner to focus on complex matters like creating complex test cases, identifying ways to test complex areas in the best possible manner. And so that's why testing craftsmanship is still valid, is still important, and it should be diminished.
So you can't say that this is an inevitable consequence of Agile. It's not. There are some very effective Agile teams, but Agile, when it's applied without input from testers, particularly when the testing happens within scrums where there is not sufficient discipline within the existing development team, or when the tester in all the scrums is like super junior and has no one to talk to about good practices, that this can degenerate into lots of good testing in the detail and huge holes at the macro level, right? So like massive issues in terms of environment and data management can occur when many Scrum teams are operating in ways that maximize for the individual tester with no kind of concept of, okay, what might be the bigger impacts? How do I actually effectively integration test what my team is doing with the other teams? And so there are many ways to make Agile work perfectly and smoothly. Please, I'm a massive Agile advocate. However, I've seen it go wrong when the testing competency is not recognized, and when in particular the testers have no one to look up to. And I think that's kind of the smell that I have. I walk around and I ask the tester in each scrum, I say, hey, who do you go to for advice on testing? And if the answer is my scrum master, and the scrum master is a dev by trade, and their testing isn't awesome, because devs can be awesome at testing as well, they're just unicorns, right? But if the tester's answer is, I don't know, or I just figure it out, I Google it, then there's something wrong here, right? Like, we need to make sure that there's always someone else in the organization who's got more experience. Now that can take the form of having senior testers in some of the scrums and junior testers in others, but having an informal group. But this is something you have to figure out, and we work with clients to kind of, structure. So, how do we get there? Like, the well-meaning approach was we looked at the amazing ability of creative developers to solve problems, and we thought, hey, this can solve the problem of testing. And actually, we can see like some organizations, like the FANG organizations, being very effective with highly publicized DevOps approaches. There's a disconnect between the literature I feel, of Agile and DevOps and the reality of perhaps how it's actually being implemented in these organizations. When I speak to people who work in some of the highest performing organizations and in their own research, it's obvious that they spend a lot of time, a lot of energy, a lot of money on testing, and that it's anything but a development only focus. Like, they have some of their most intellectual, the smartest people in these organizations are working on problems that are essentially, how do I test or how do I engineer for productivity amongst the developers, right? So this is, there's something of a disconnect between the literature. Like, go search in the Phoenix project for references to testing, and you'll find there are very, very few, and it's very poorly explored in those books, right? Those seminal books on DevOps and seminal books on Agile, they just don't explore it enough, and so it's easy to overlook, right?
Yes.
You know, so go ahead.
Probably one more example how testers are treated sometimes. So I worked in a very large organization, and this process of getting so testers outside of organization or has started even before adopting Agile. And the company management decided to dissolve the testing department and assign every single tester to a dedicated delivery center in the project. And distributing testers across the project led to the fact that testing expertise in the company began to erode. And actually, what is good? So it was recognized quickly. So this problem was recognized quickly. So specifically, that the lack of cross-pollination between testers from different projects influence development of testing skills, tester skills, their knowledge, and sometimes their career growth. So fortunately, as I said, the problem was recognized, and few measures to cure it have been taken. First of all, the company established a training center and engaged the best testing experts in creating test training sessions and courses, and to ensure that everyone is engaged in these sessions either as an expert or as a trainee. And there were some other steps taken, but it definitely impacted further steps, and testing expertise started. So this testing expertise hasn't been lost. It began to be collected in in the training center and in different forms, in form of documents, in form of courses, in form of online trainings. And it was a really good progress once these measures were taken.
So let's talk about what we've learned. I think we covered just three. We've quickly covered just three sort of testing smells that we think we've felt, right? And it's not by any means comprehensive. These are also not refined in the way that we can see in the Agile community. They refine these ideas. They're very, very eloquently put, and they're really a topic of conversation in the community. But we feel like as a group, as an industry, we've definitely had approaches that have been flawed, and we also feel like we owe it to ourselves to learn some lessons from those mistakes. We ask ourselves constantly for our teams and for the obviously the projects we're involved in, right? Like, are we set up with mentoring? Are we set up with career advancement for testers? And we ask ourselves, are we measuring success correctly? And we also ask ourselves, are we looking at tools the wrong way, right? Are we approaching process and tools the wrong way? Fundamentally, what we want to set up a conversation, and what we would love to have a conversation with everyone here about, is like, do we recognize when received wisdom is incorrect, when we're taking it too far? Are we ready to learn from historical mistakes? And how do we actually capture that so that we can move forwards, right? Like as an industry, we know we've kind of had moments when it was uncomfortable to be in testing, when the testing team was under immense pressure, when the balance was just wrong for different reasons. And voicing that with clients and finding a good balance where we can be the most productive members of the IT delivery team that is possible. It is difficult. You know, how do we voice that? How do we actually be more productive, I guess, and better contributors to the value that we want to deliver to the end customer? So these are some of the lessons we learned, and I think, you know, the question for everyone on the call, this where we kind of like to have a conversation, is like, have you come across other anti-patterns, other things we didn't notice? Is it possible to have a list of testing smells, like Scrum smells, but for testing? And if so, what would your top 3 be? That's a question like I'd love to have a conversation with everyone on the call about. Don't all raise your hands at once.
Any comments?
Hi, this is Ivana. I don't know whether I should turn on my cam, but hello. I've actually, I agree with you, and I've seen that huge push to automate everything, and automation does found some defects, but miss a lot. So what I've felt is that when I focus on automation, I'm missing on testing, because automation focus is more development focus, and testing itself is more creative focus. So on the project that I'm at right now, it seems like we are moving, like automation is the big thing, and there is not time put aside to do just exploratory testing, or like not automated testing.
Yeah, the comment I've heard a lot of time is like, oh, if you automate that test, then we've in some way captured the value of that test. Like, we'll never need to come back to it again. There'll be no further maintenance, right? And that's I really think that that's a massive problem of communication and education. I think, you know, typically people who don't do test automation don't understand the link between test automation and the system under test and how those two are affecting each other.
Yeah, and
because I would say that the automation is 80%, that the maintaining automation test script is 80% of the work, not creating it.
That's true in many projects. And one more thing, which is always overlooked, that so a test case to be automated should be invented, created, and validated. And it means that so this test case is already passed, and we automate test cases which are passed.
Yeah.
Well, where the agile and DevOps is going is that they know what they're going to test, so they created the test cases, and then that's the only section that they want to test. So if that passed, they're okay, and the rest doesn't matter. So it's just like, I have a feeling it's a single stream, and what's happening on the sides, there is no time to test that, and it's not valued. It said, okay, we know that maybe not everything will work, but we care only about this core part to work, and everything else, it's not that important.
Yeah, I mean, the best exposition I've seen about this is in a book called Leading with Quality, I think is the name of it. And there's a section in there where they really like explain the value of automation in a way that I feel like any project manager or any Scrum Master would really understand, because they kind of break it down into that return on investment conversation that resonates with someone whose mind is on the budget and the schedule and the, you know, the return on investment. You know, I think we have to keep thinking of ways to reinvent that conversation, right? And we kind of, up until this point, often we've been in the weeds of like, how do we make this automation work? How do we explain, the specifics of how to identify an object on a UI and so on and so forth, and what should the approach be to automate? Clear explanation of the ROI and the levers that underpin automation value is still something that hasn't been adequately explored, even in this book, which I think is the best example I can find. And I've done a lot of kind of like research to try to figure out how has someone written this down in a way that I haven't, and it's better, and it's a way to explain it that's clearer and more intuitive. Nope. This is the best I've found. I would love suggestions if you found a better one, but I don't think we've yet mastered the art of like really explaining how complex it is to, there you go, leading quality. So we've not yet mastered the art of explaining to someone who doesn't know about automation all the things they need to know to make good decisions about what to automate, right? Like there's so much under the surface of this iceberg that is test automation, which we need to kind of explain to them in order for them to take educated decisions about where to spend that test automation time.
So I see one more hand raised.
Yeah, hi, this is Sneha Lohar. I recently moved to Vancouver and this is my first meetup, so thank you for arranging this. And on the automation perspective, I have totally contradictory example where for a client, in fact, this is my current project, where we are delivering so fast and the sprint velocity is so center of everything that automation is on the side. I mean, we don't care if you automate, we don't care what's the coverage, but we want the delivery. But in order for us, our quality groups to save our backs, we want to make sure that we want to automate and we want to at least have enough regression. But it's always a very thin line to draw and achieve that balance where we want to have enough automation, plus we want to have a sprint delivery, plus we want to do it at the same sprint. And we don't want to be in that catch-up mode. So it's kind of sometimes gets frustrating. I'm pretty sure this is kind of a similar experience for others as well, but you kind of fall into that loop where we want to always fall in that catch up. Okay, I want to catch up on the sprints functionality that I've delivered and I don't have no time for automation. And at the same time, I have my current sprint work, right? This was one of the automation point I want to make, but the other point that I wanted to also talk about was a shift left mentality. This has been in an industry and is already being talked a lot, that involving our quality engineering experts from the beginning so that we can capture these tests, we can already prepare our quality test cases. That has also helped. But it's a kind of a mature organization to take that kind of route. It's not that easy because obviously it involves money, ROI, because your quality person is now getting involved from the beginning, whatnot. But that's the 2 points I wanted to kind of quickly share because we were talking about automation and whatnot. Yeah, thank you.
I'd love to explore some of that stuff. I think shift left is like a perennial flag that we all rally under from time to time and come back to. And I reviewed literature kind of for this. I went back to testing magazines as far back as 2007, and shift left was in there. Like 2007, we were talking about shift left, and here we are in 2021. We're still talking about shift left.
True. It's just a concept. It's just a concept. It's very hard to follow for companies, and it's hard to implement in reality.
Yeah, totally. And it's difficult to explain as well, right? One of the things that I think is so hard is we're trying to, in the end of the day, we're trying to obviously cover technology risk so that we know that we're not going to see bugs. We're also trying to convince like product owners and product managers or clients or stakeholders that the risk is managed. It's so much harder to explain unit tests than it is to explain UI tests. And sometimes this drives kind of a, a behavior that's almost like, coats on the back of the chair at 8 p.m. kind of mentality, where it's like, well, we want to see all these things done end to end, right? Well, okay, why? And how can we do this in a shift left and still achieve sign off at the end of the day, right? Like, how can we still achieve the acceptance that we want to see of the quality? How can we explain, like, unit tests in a way that actually helps us to reduce the amount of testing we've got done? One of the things that I think quite often happens when you described automation and the struggle to get automation there is sometimes you'll see teams where they automate more, and then because the automation isn't in the right areas, they actually have to do more manual testing. So total number of tests goes up, right? Because the demand is to maintain all of the tests that have been automated. Otherwise, you're in some way losing the value you created when you created those tests. You have to maintain them, right? Like, that's the perception.
True.
Because otherwise the percentage of tests are going down. But like, if they're not relevant, you can't just run these and do less manual tests. So you can get into a situation where you're actually increasing the total amount of testing effort as you're maintaining irrelevant tests, right? You still have to do all the manual testing on top of it. There's a bit of this is just like explaining it, and shift left is so complex.
Yeah, and there's an education on the inverted pyramid too. I mean, what to automate, right? I mean, you go crazy and automate everything on UI, you're not really testing the system. So invest in your API testing, invest in your unit testing. And that's again, it's a mental shift, and it has to drive from the top bottom in an organization. It's not just it's a wave.
Yeah, I guess test lead should be engaged in that education process, and always so it's a permanent process when a test lead communicates some reasonable ideas with other stakeholders and tries to convince to get them engaged in certain activities, or vice versa, get rid of some activities which are no more valid, no more helping address risks.
Yeah, again, that can all be rooted back into this idea of like, okay, so we're measuring testing and we're wanting to increase the level of automation. Are we doing this because we want to save cost, because testing is a cost lever, or are we doing it because this is adding value to the product? Like, why are we actually automating this, right? If the reason why we're automating these tests is to increase the ability to find more defects, which is inherently increasing the value for the given input, then this is a much more kind of positive slant. It's just a slant. It's a way to look at things. But if you look at everything in testing in terms of a value creation lens, it can really help with some of those conversations.
Okay. More questions, comments?
I had another anti-pattern that I wanted to note. My name is Iris, and the one that I was thinking of is QA is always somehow getting left at the end of everything, even though they're saying, oh yes, quality is very important, and then QA, I find, doesn't really get considered in either in the requirement stage with determining the acceptance criteria. And even if you are doing agile, I've found that sometimes QA is getting maybe like 2 or 3 days out of the sprint to quickly test everything because development has taken the time to be coding and writing out and building the product, and then QA just kind of gets involved at the very end. One of the ways I tried to fight that anti-pattern was to write out test cases in the beginning to at least clarify what my understanding was for when I get that final product to test, right? Because you have to have something to test, or else it's kind of pointless. So there's that dichotomy between having the product to test and preparing for that product to test.
Yeah, that's thanks for sharing. That's super relevant in any methodology. Like, it's so painful when the expectation is that testing would just be done, or that the deliverable itself is signed off, and then there's a fight to get the obvious for an independent observer problems incorporated, right? Like the whole point of testing is it's an independent lens on something that's already of good enough quality supposedly, right? And then providing feedback on something when it's already finalized is really painful and problematic. And like you say, it's kind of perennial, right? Like I think I love that because it's such a, there's many layers of the psychology of why that's painful. Like it's a very vulnerable position to be in as a tester. It takes a lot of courage to kind of speak up and say, hey, I've noticed this. I know you've already signed off this deliverable, but I'm afraid we've got to go back, or I believe this is an issue. And quite often what's tough about it is it's like, I can't tell you definitively it's an issue. I want to investigate it with you. Please, will you spend some time versus working on this next thing that you're working on as a developer? Like, and you don't have time. You're like the developer's madly fixing things, and it's like a super difficult. It requires a huge amount of courage, and I think it's a great example to share because it's just perennial. Like we forever get into this moment when testers are kind of asked to step out and like really, exhibit a certain amount of courage. So thank you for that. It's awesome.
Yeah. Thank you. Good point. Very good point. We still have a couple of minutes, right, Jocelyn?
Hi, Peter. Hi, Mekhani. This is Aditya, and I'll also like to add few inputs here. I hope you can hear me fine.
Yep.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So one thing I've seen with Agile is like the way we draft the test cases. I think the traditional way of writing test cases doesn't fit well in the sprint cycle. So, because now you are not writing like elaborated steps. Now you have to get down to writing like some high-level stuff, which are kind of like a like a roadmap of doing testing, but not like getting to like too formal level of test cases. So I think that's also like one area where it's not like clearly defined as to how things should move, because in a sprint, like things are moving really fast, and you have to test more, and you don't want to spend much time documenting stuff. So
yeah, and I think it's great you share that, because this I think is something that we hinted at earlier, which is like in the Agile documentation, of course, there are these high-level principles, and there's not so much written about this. I mean, like I want to acknowledge there's been some great writing, great thinking about how to be effective as a tester in Agile. Like there's the Lisa Crispin books that really explain a lot, and they help a lot. There's a lot of roadmap there, but like you say, that getting to an agreement in Agile that's effective and modifying it can be a real struggle. We don't have enough conversation, perhaps, like maybe about how to do that, because it's assumed that you will just evolve your way into something that works. But if everyone else in the Scrum is not a tester, maybe that won't happen, right? Like if the Scrum Master and the product owner don't have any experience in testing, and neither does any other person in the Scrum, then negotiating to things that work for the tester, because often in my experience, it's been one or two testers in a Scrum, and that sort of power disparity, they're often the most junior people in the Scrum. That power disparity in terms of like the conversations that happen, like lessons learned, are the testers really being heard when the lessons are being learned, right? Like if you said in a Scrum, okay, like we didn't have enough time to plan these test cases, is anyone really going to listen to you? That's a problem. I think that like we haven't really necessarily solved that, and it's something that I've come up against, and I completely agree. That's a kind of anti-pattern where you just can't get to agreement on like how to do test planning in Scrum, right? And the Scrum's just runaway train.
Testers should be heard, and that could be one of the biggest issue here if they are not heard. And so they're pushed to do whatever Scrum Master, product owner expect. And so sometimes these planning phases may eventually come to excessive scope which cannot be tested within the sprint time.
Yeah, it's difficult to work out even if you have excessive scope before it's too late. If you're planning your tests halfway through, if you're getting to a planning of tests halfway through the sprint, you may get to a point where you're like, oh, I'm halfway through a sprint and we've developed code that we will not be able to test in this sprint.
Yep.
Yep.
We had a question. What's the worst anti-pattern in software testing? Oh, I don't know. Mikhail, do you know? Have you got one that
No,
like really?
so
Maybe we
the
can
thing
rephrase
is-
the question. What's the one that irritates you the most?
Yeah.
Are there some top 5, top 10? I don't know. I'd
So
love to
we
find
just-
out. I'd love to create a list of all the ones you've seen. You know, Natalia, I'd love to hear what your experiences are. You know?
We just indicated so that we discussed only 3, and we expect that there's more than 3 exist, and probably you can help us to identify them.
Yeah.
Actually, some of the worst would be when they're combined.
yeah, right. And there's many
Sure.
happening at once. Yeah.
That's a good point.
We're not trying to illustrate things that are mutually exclusive, and the list is not also collectively exhaustive. We anticipate that some of these will happen at the same time as others. Also, that there's lots more out there. We want to just start exactly the conversation, Natalia, that you have hinted at, right? Which is like, hey, what are the anti-patterns we can all be aware of? How should we learn from them? What can we do better, right? How can we explain the work of this profession in a more productive way so that we can create more value for our customers, right? That's essentially the knowledge transfer and the knowledge sharing that we're trying to do here. So we hope that this has spurred some thought process, right? The list will follow at some point. Yeah, maybe, right? I'll write a blog post. If you all want to contribute, I'll write a blog post, a call to action, right? I'm happy. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, great point. So we can continue this discussion online.
Yeah, totally. Okay, so I believe we're running out of time, Jocelyn. So I guess we have a chance to answer one more question.
Yeah, if there's any last minute questions, please feel free to jump in now. Otherwise, we'll kind of end off the meetup.
Thank you, everyone, for your contribution. It's been great to have a conversation. I really appreciate the input.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Peter and Mikhail.
Thank
Thanks,
you so
everyone. Have a
much,
great
Peter and
night.
Mikhail.
Thank you.
This was
Thank
my
you.
first
It
meetup.
was really helpful.
Really good.
Thank you. Thank you, Vikas.
Thank you everyone for a great session. Thank you. Have a good evening. Goodbye.